of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me out there? Great. My name is Dave Brown. I have the privilege of serving as sheriff here in Skamania County. I know that tonight there are people here from Clark, Lickitat, and Skamania. Is there anyone else from Hood River or another county besides Representative Shea? Very good. Welcome, everybody. This is the second installment, if you will, of a series that we've titled The Principles of Liberty. We have couched this as a nonpartisan function. It doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or a Republican, a libertarian or an independent, or some other affiliation. This is intended to be about liberty and about freedom and relearning what the founding principles are that this country was built on. You might remember, if you were at the last one, Commissioner Chris Brong spoke. He's here again tonight in the audience to listen and learn. Thank you for being here, sir. Also with us tonight, Commissioner McKenzie is in the back listening as well. Thank you very much for attending. I was prompted by Dan Boys, who's sitting up front here videotaping, and he asked if he could do that tonight. There's actually a couple of cameras, and the fact is that actually in this country you can, and so he is. And I appreciate that because two things. It maintains a record for somebody who may want to go back and listen again and didn't pick it up the first time. And secondly, there are a lot of people who are not here tonight that asked me, is there any way you can video this? Is there any way that we can get access to it? And I said, you know, there are a couple of people doing that. We'll be able to talk later. We are blessed tonight to have Representative David Taylor from the 15th District with us and Representative Matt Shea from the 4th District, Spokane area, with us tonight. Both of these men are championing for the freedom agenda in Olympia and for Washington State. And I think the fact that they've taken time out of their schedule, I think they're in Olympia tomorrow actually. They're going to be bumped here tonight in Skamania County with heavy security. It is truly an honor for us to have them with us. I'm excited about the message that they have for us tonight, and we're going to be here until about 7. They may run a little longer, it's up to them, but they'll speak for a little while, and then they'll take some questions from you if you have any. So, it's not to waste any more of their time or yours, I'll turn it over to them. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming out. You know, when I represented this area, I don't think I ever got applause like that, so thank you. I move around a lot, so I apologize. I've been accused of ADHD, so I do move around a lot. It helps me think. I'm here tonight, David Taylor, 15th District. It was an honor and a pleasure to represent all of you for about a year and a half. Now with redistricting, we've moved up to just Yakima County, and you have some new representatives in the 14th. I can tell you, Matt and I driving down tonight, comment after comment. Okay, so now we're going through Vinton and up on the hills of White Salmon, and we're going to be seeing the Drano, the White Salmon River, and just the tour guide coming down. So it was a pleasure making that drive and seeing the things that just wonderful memories for being down here. What we thought we'd do tonight is just do a real brief introduction. Freedom Agenda, what is it? What we did in 2013, how it began, some of the pieces of legislation that fit within it. Then I'm going to turn it over to Representative Shea. He's going to talk about some liberty, a little bit of preparedness, self-reliance, and then we're going to kind of wrap it all up in 2014, what to expect, what we're working on right now, and then it'll open up to question and answer. We both firmly believe, and that's the best part of the night for us, is the question and answer. It's what issues are hot on your minds, what are the topics that are really burning right now for you, and how can we respond, and quite possibly how can we have a legislative answer to that. I can tell you, and I'm sure Matt would agree, much of what we do in Olympia comes from you. We get a phone call, we come to an event like this, and it's, hey, have you guys ever thought about, no, you know what, we haven't. And it turns into a piece of legislation. One of the things that, I can't tell you how encouraged I am by tonight's turnout. There's a lot going on. There's, what do we hear? It's something at the school. It's curriculum night, Common Core night at the school. And there's a C-Tran meeting over in Clark County. So, appreciate the opportunity to be here and for coming out. What we get a lot of in Olympia, or when we come back from Olympia, is, hey, thanks for taking the stand, thanks for killing that bill. And the best example we have is thanks for killing the gun control bill. And my response is, well, you're welcome. And it was a pleasure working on it. It was a lot of hard work. We had a series of amendments prepared. And then to reveal that it wasn't really us that killed that bill. It was you. Because when you step out as grassroots and make the phone calls and send the emails, and I can tell you that there were literally hundreds, if not thousands of emails a day going to representatives saying, no, do not pass 1588 gun control. Yeah, we made it difficult. That's all we can do in a minority position in the House. Folks, it was you all that spoke up and said no. And the best example I've got of that this year, pre-filed piece of legislation which was to repeal the stand your ground law in Washington State. It was a duty to retreat. Sherry Appleton, a progressive Democrat from the West Side, introduced that bill. The grassroots exploded. There was a fire burning across Washington State, and that bill was never formally introduced. The power of the grassroots was 100% on display that day leading up to the start of session, because the grassroots said, no, we don't want it. So the Freedom Agenda, if you're on Facebook, you can follow what we do with the Freedom Agenda at Freedom Agenda Washington. Matt and I also have pages. The third piece of the puzzle that's not here tonight is Representative Jason Overstreet out of Linden, the 42nd District. So we've got Northeast, Northwest, and Central Washington covered. And just so everybody knows, we've sort of added, not 100%, but for the most part, we've added Representative Liz Pike out of the 18th, Camas Washougal area. She's been working with us on a lot of the Freedom Agenda issues, and she's been doing a really good job for us. So we're slowly moving across the state and getting people that are involved in the Freedom Agenda from various areas so that we have a much broader voice. So you can follow us on Facebook, and that's probably the best way to follow the Freedom Agenda, at least right now. We're working on some other avenues. So last July, the three of us, Jason, Matt, and I, kind of stepped out of the box a little and came out and endorsed a candidate for governor, Sharon Hadian, who, let's just say that the political party that we're involved with didn't appreciate. And it was at that point, I think, that really launched this idea of how can we put forward a slate of bills that represent what we firmly believe in being constitutional principles, liberty-minded, freedom-minded. What can we do? And so we slowly began brainstorming that idea, and what we came up with is the very simple platform. Less government, lower taxes, more freedom. Because when it all boils down at the end of the day, those are the things that matter. We reduce the cost on people's daily lives. We get government out of your lives. And ultimately, we increase freedom in doing that. And what we ended up doing was a slate of bills that turned into the most successful slate of conservative constitutional basis bills this state has seen in a decade. Out of the 40 bills that were introduced, 5 were signed into law without veto. We had an amendment that Matt put forward that prohibited the use of Sharia law in specialty courts in Washington State. We had a success through those bills and through the grassroots that nobody ever expected. We had a bill that would reduce the state sales tax by 1%. We had the Save Our Homes Act, which part of it got passed into law. I'll let Matt talk about it, but part of it is on an issue of 601. So if you haven't, read up on Initiative 601. We had the UAV or drone bill, as it's been called, that not only made it out of committee, but made it to the House floor, ready for a vote, only to be killed by the Speaker under pressure from Boeing. We had an indefinite detention bill that not only received one public hearing, but had a subsequent work session. We had a TSA bill that, quite frankly, we need to do more work on, that simply said, look, TSA, you can't take kids away from their parents. And oh, by the way, we're going to enforce assault laws in Washington State. We don't care that it's TSA. We included, I've got my list here. Repeal the Growth Management Act. We had a bill that said you can't rely on international law for land use actions. We did a bill for the constitutional currency. Folks, we covered the gamut. And how many hearings did we get? 14 hearings, which is unheard of. 5 signed into law. That success came not only because it takes work on our part to do it, but the success came because the grassroots got behind it. They said, we like that idea. Go with it. We want to hear more. We want, how do you react to this question? And we had give and take like we haven't seen before, quite frankly. It was an amazing, for a session that went 153 days and was completely bent around an axle because of tax increases. It was the most enjoyable session I personally have ever had because of the interaction. One of the things we did during session was a lot of fun. We did a very brief podcast. It's on SoundCloud. I think you can still find them, where we talked about the issues of the day. We talked about gun control. We talked about sound money. Basically talked about everything that is in the freedom agenda. So that's a real basic, brief introduction of what we were doing in 2013, and near the end we'll get into what we're looking forward to in 2014. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Matt. Folks, I can tell you, I got there, most of you know I got there mid-session in 09. My first day in session was March 30th. I showed up and they said, you get to start voting. I didn't do any committee work. It was shock and awe for me. Matt was there. His background is a constitutional attorney. He is one of my closest friends, and it's an absolute pleasure for me to bring him down and introduce him to you tonight because he's a warrior and he's a good friend.
I want to thank you all for being here tonight. I hope I'm on. Can you hear me good in the back? If not, I have an infantry voice. I spent 10 years in the United States Army as a commander, and I came back home in 2006 from the last tour I had in Iraq, and I saw my country had changed so dramatically in a year and a half. And it had changed so much in a year and a half, I had to do something. I couldn't sit on the couch anymore. And we're going to talk about some political things, but more importantly, some freedom and liberty things tonight. But it's always important, and I always start every speech that I give with this, that our hope is not in man, our hope is in Jesus Christ, for those of us believers in the audience tonight. And the reason I say that is because the founders understood we can't have a republic without a moral people. Amen. We can't. So I'm going to start tonight with John McCain. That's kind of weird. So many of you probably heard that John McCain was caught playing internet poker the other day during the Senate hearing on Syria. Now I was shocked. I was shocked for 2 reasons. The first was because I didn't know John McCain knew how to use the smartphone. But the second was the kind of more vitriolic liberal reaction to it, because I thought, what about your own candidates like Anthony Weiner? I mean, it wasn't like John McCain was playing strip poker on his smartphone. So where have we come in this country where that doesn't even get brought up, where that gets marginalized? And that goes back to us being a moral people. To have freedom, to have liberty, we must be a moral people. Our founders of this state actually understood it too with Article 1, Section 32 of the Washington State Constitution. So I'm going to embarrass some people probably. How many of you have actually read the Washington State Constitution? Raise your hand. If you have not, read Article 1 if you don't read anything else. Because Article 1, Section 32 says a return to fundamental principles is necessary for the continuation of freedom. It says it in our state constitution. It tells us what to do. Right in our state constitution. We just have to do it. At the national level, right now, how many of you think we're on the right track? Raise your hand. Nobody. One person. I'm going to read some things to you to say that not only are we not on the right track, but we have to ask ourselves some questions as Americans. Right now, at the federal level, we print $85 billion a month. A month. $85 billion. How many of you think that that's sustainable? We can't possibly sustain that. No country in the history of the world has ever sustained that. We have $61 trillion in unfunded liabilities, according to the Washington Policy Center, a nonpartisan organization. 61 trillion. Our current budget isn't even close to that. How can we possibly pay that off? And in the state of Washington, and these numbers are a couple years old, it's a little worse. We have $41 billion of unfunded liabilities in the state of Washington, according to the Washington Policy Center. $41 billion. Our current state budget is $32 billion. How do we afford that? How do we pay for that? So we have to ask ourselves a couple of questions. If we continue going down this road, is the economy going to collapse? Is the economy going to get worse? Or isn't it? I was interviewed by a reporter, and I asked that question, are you going to defend printing $85 billion a month, $61 trillion unfunded liabilities as something that's good for this country? No answer. Next question, right? Washington State's even worse, and the reporters, no one can answer that because everyone intuitively knows it's wrong. So what do we do? I think it's the second question that we need to answer. Should Americans be self-reliant? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes. And yet, FEMA says, plan, prepare, stay informed. Pacific Power put out a recent email that says to be prepared. Up in our neck of the woods, they've done the same. Costco, in its latest magazine, Be Prepared. So I want to talk a little bit about self-reliance tonight because I think the genius of the Founding Fathers was simply this. Having a large republic made up of smaller republics, the states, made up of smaller, self-reliant communities, is one of the core principles of freedom. Being self-reliant is a principle of freedom. We must be self-reliant if we want to be free. So I want to talk about 8 things I think we should be all doing right now. And I think this sums up everything. The first is this. We need to do what we say we believe. It is so frustrating for Dave and I to hear certain particular politicians say one thing on the campaign trail and go do another. Just tell us what you're going to do. Be honest. We can disagree, but be honest about it. Do what we say we believe. That means if we're Christians, we need to read the Bible. It also means as a citizen, we should read the state constitution. We should read the U.S. Constitution because we have to do what we say we believe. How can you hold us accountable as elected officials if you don't even know what's in the state constitution? Do what we say we believe. The second is we need to quit going to government for our needs. We need to quit going to government for our needs. That's not only as individuals, that's as communities. That's as communities. During a disaster, the first call for the county sheriff should be to a church, should be to a local nonprofit to help people in that emergency. It should be to our friends and neighbors. It should not be to a higher governmental authority. We should be able to take care of ourselves in emergencies. And 40 years ago, it was nothing for our grandparents and great-grandparents to have some stuff stored up, was it? wasn't a big deal. We need to quit going to government for our needs. The next one, number 3, is we need to owe no one anything. It means we need to get out of debt as individuals if we expect the federal government to get out of debt, the state government to get out of debt. Spokane Valley, we were able to overturn 5 city council positions in one election. And that election marked a turning point for Spokane Valley. Spokane Valley now has an annual budget of about $31 million. They have $28 million in reserves and no debt. They could literally run for 8 months without any tax revenue coming into the coffers. That should be a model for the country, instead of Detroit or Chicago. We need to owe no one anything. The next thing we need to do is we need to prepare ourselves individually. We need to be ready to help our neighbors in the event of an emergency, prepare our family, prepare our community. And lastly, we need to give guidance and direction to those that the Lord has put under our authority. It might just be our family, but it's important to do that. What do I mean by prepare ourselves individually? What does that mean? I think it's summed up by this. We are commanded, and I believe everybody believes in the golden rule, but we are commanded to love our neighbor. How can we love our neighbor if government is doing it for us? Seriously, how can we do it? How can we even know what's going on with our neighbor? All these kids walk around today with smartphones and not paying attention to anything that's going on around them. I was driving down the freeway this morning, and I watched as police pulled up to this parking lot, and there's a dead body laying there. Somebody had been murdered. That person had a family. That was a son, maybe a father, maybe an uncle. Do we even know our neighbors anymore? When I was a kid, I remember having 4th of July parties in our neighborhoods. You guys remember that? Knowing who your neighbor was? We've got to get back there. I sum it up, and I will conclude with this. I sum it up with the 4 S's. And then I will talk a little bit about food. But the 4 S's are very simply this. Number 1, we need to get in shape. Because in an emergency, you got to be in shape to help other people. Even if it's as simple as hauling sandbags. Flood. You need to learn how to shoot. Thomas Jefferson himself said it is very important to learn how to shoot, because it's not for the sake of using a gun. It frees the mind. That's Thomas Jefferson that said that. That's a founding father that said that. The third one, and I think this is very important, is we need to learn how to work together in small groups. That means we got to be team players in small groups. We can't be that lone wolf. Because in any sort of an emergency situation, the sheriff needs help, right? He needs to know that in an emergency, everybody in this room is going to be there filling sandbags if there's a flood. He needs to know everybody's going to be there to have his back. That's important. We need to learn to work together as small groups. And the last thing I think, and this is very important for everybody, is we need to learn self-defense. Because again, it frees the mind. We need to learn self-defense. I will also mention food. We should all have some food stored up. Now some people say, well, that's just radical. Well, that's FEMA, okay? So we call FEMA radical. We need to have some food stored up in case of an emergency so we can help our neighbors. It's just as simple as that. That's a principle of freedom. We can be self-reliant in our neighborhoods. We don't have to get help from the outside. We have all the food stored up we need for 6 months. Pretty simple, don't you think? How about medical supplies? It's probably another big one. Why do I bring all that up? How many of you think your tax dollars are spent 100% wisely 100% of the time? Right? Now, there are some folks over in Olympia, that say, no, they aren't. And we need to increase your gas tax because we are so wisely spending your road dollars. And my response now to them, because I kind of got sick of it, was simply this. If you want to give to the Washington State government, here is the official donation form. You can do it. And I will leave it up here. Somebody can copy it. Here's the official donation form to the Washington State government. Let's talk about the freedom agenda. We broke it down into lower taxes, less government, and more freedom. Under more freedom, we just picked issues we believed were core to liberty. Pro-life, pro-liberty, pro-property, pro-gun, pro-veteran, and securing our elections so we actually have free and fair elections. That was our simple freedom agenda. And like Dave said, out of 40 bills, we had 14 hearings, 7 were passed out of committee, 5 were signed into law without veto. That has not happened in over a decade in Washington State. But it was because of the grassroots. It was because of the folks. And one of the reasons it was because of the folks is because of the internet. The internet has revolutionized politics. Literally revolutionized. It has changed politics. We have a network right now of 25,000 people we can hit one button and send all. But that's just the immediate network. Our extended network is 350,000 in the state of Washington, and our network beyond the borders in the state of Washington is over 1 million. And when all those people are calling, literally we had a story where one legislator comes running into our office and says, "What is House Bill 1632? I'm getting all these phone calls, I gotta sign it, I gotta sign it, where is it, where is it?" That's the power of the grassroots. That's what you can do. People, I think, just sit and say, you know, my vote doesn't count, my phone call doesn't count, my email doesn't count. It counts. We see it over there. Right now, if somebody gets just 10 phone calls, it's a big deal on an issue. When they get 100, it's a showstopper. When we were doing this on the Second Amendment and trying to stop gun control, all of you, people throughout Washington State called in by the thousands. And you know what? It worked. It worked. So please know that your vote, that your participation counts. I will now turn it back over to Dave. We can talk a little bit about the gas tax, and then I think we can take questions and go from there and see what's on your heart tonight. But thank you again for having this wayward Spokane Valley guy down to Skamania. It's a gorgeous country down there. Thank you.
Before we get into Q&A, I wanted to hit on probably in my opinion, what our top priorities are going to continue to be looking forward into 2014. The way it works in Olympia, it's a biennium. So when we're elected to a 2-year position, those bills that are introduced the first year carry forward. So all the bills that didn't move from 2013 are still active, and we're going to be working those bills. And among the bills that we're going to be working on those is opting Washington State out of Obamacare. That's one of our top priorities. We're going to be pushing the constitutional use of drones and the constitutional use of surveillance devices. There's been a lot of, anybody here look at Drudge? I got a couple minutes. So, the Tri-City Americans is a junior hockey league team playing the WHO, and their opening night, DHS is going to be testing their new facial recognition software at the hockey game. So we're going to have a bill put forward this year that talks in the broader sense the constitutional use of surveillance. We've got a lot of police departments, at least in Western Washington, some in the Yakima area, they're now using license plate readers, and they're collecting data based on license plate location, and they're storing that data without limitation. So we're going to take those on. We're going to go right back after the Firearms Freedom Act that says if you produce firearm, ammunition, or firearm component in Washington State, there is no federal oversight. And any laws that's passed subsequent to January 1st of 2013 dealing with gun control is null and voided from the federal level. Those are our big ones. The newest one we've got, and I really hope we get some momentum with it. Last time I checked, Skamania County is 96% publicly owned. It might have gone up because the government likes to buy land. Anybody here know what other 3 states came into the Union the same time as Washington? It was Montana, North Dakota, and South Dakota. And if you look at the Enabling Act when those 4 states were created, it says that the federal land that's being reserved gets sold. 46% of Washington State is owned, federally owned. 46%. You know what the total is in North and South Dakota? Roughly 4%. It's time we reverse that, and we're going to run the bill again this year. We ran it 2 years ago to get the federal land back on into private hands and on the tax rolls, back into production, putting the forest back. And the last little piece, and Representative Jason Overstreet's our lead on this, but it's nullification of the indefinite detention provisions of the NDA. Those are really our top list. As always happens, as people contact us, additional bills can move forward, but folks, with your help, we can, in fact, move Washington to a better place, expand freedom, lower taxes, and quite frankly, get government out of our lives. And with that, we did it, 30 minutes. So we have 30 minutes of Q&A. And we can move around with the mic so we can make sure everybody hears it or restate the question.
Thank you for your service to our great state. Just because I'm kind of curious, since this is a principle for liberty, what is your definition of liberty, and how does it apply to the Constitution? So, for both of you, I'd like to hear that.
So let's start with the role of government. The role of government is to protect our God-given unalienable rights to life, liberty, property, and the ability to defend the same. That's the role of government. So what is liberty? Liberty is exactly what they're supposed to be protected. It's supposed to be the freedom to do what we want with our property, as long as it's not harming somebody else. It's the freedom to defend our property when we need to, without fear of repercussion. It's the ability to use our property without fearing the government is going to take it or mark parts of it unusable without any sort of compensation. But it is not liberty. I want to draw a very clear distinction between liberty and libertine. Ordered liberty is what our founders believed in. Again, going back to a moral and religious people, that's what our founders believed was necessary for this republic to continue. It did not mean you could just do whatever you wanted, whenever you wanted. And I think that's a very clear distinction. Dave, I'll let you finish if you want to.
Really, the only thing that I would add to that is on the private property piece, the compensation when the use is disallowed or taken, be it through critical areas ordinance of the Growth Management Act, Shoreline Management Act buffers. That compensation actually occurs so that, yeah, we have life, liberty, property, and the defense thereof, but it's also within the U.S. Constitution, state constitution, it does allow that private property be taken public use if there's compensation. So that would be the only piece that I would add to it, that there's accountability on the government, and that would be the example of the accountability part.
And one of the things is part of the freedom agenda, when we talk about less government, I want to define that very quickly too. We said the rulemaking that's going on in Olympia is insane. So we don't even know what the rules are. All of the lawyers don't even know what all the rules are. So how can we possibly expect the average citizen to know what all the rules are? So one of our proposals was very simply to rein that in by saying that every rule that's passed with an economic impact over $1,000 must come to the legislature for final approval. So we put a stop to that, and there's actually accountability in the system. Because I think the formula is the less government there is, the more freedom there is. The more freedom there is, and that's what we're trying to protect.
Back to this, my understanding is that the only way that they can take property is eminent domain, and there has to be a reason for that taking, not just I like to look at the flowers of somebody else's yard, so I'm going to tell them they can't cut it. I don't know. I don't understand. That's why I'm asking.
Well, unfortunately, at the United States Supreme Court level, there was a case called Kelo, the Kelo decision. It was from back east. The Kelo decision said that the government could take the private property of one person and give it to another private person or entity if it increased the tax revenue. That is not what the Founding Fathers believed, and it is not what the founders of the state believed. That is what has been used now throughout the country, with the exception of the states that have reined in eminent domain. That's what's been used throughout the country to seize people's property. And then you've got another one too.
So the question, you're right.
Oh.
Now, and folks, I hate saying this, but, you know, and I apologize for saying this, the rule of law is dead. Okay? The Constitution's clear. Compensation if there's a taking. Growth Management Act, through hearings board decisions or through local comprehensive plan, critical area adoption by your county commissioner, city councils, routinely results in the taking of private property. Routinely. Fish and Wildlife will get an HPA, hydraulic permit approval. They will require setbacks. Shoreline Management Act requires setbacks and buffers. It has not been challenged. I believe that those require compensation. That's why we put bills forward to do that. The problem, and I'm the first to admit I fall into the trap. We shouldn't need to put that bill forward. We shouldn't have to remind people of what their constitutional, or remind the government of what their constitutional rights are and constitutional limitations on the government itself. I fall into the same trap. But if we don't do it, nobody's going to do it. They're going to continue to go out of control.
Well, then doesn't it go back to what Mr. Shea said, the 4 S's, sharing small groups and getting together as individuals and bucking back against that system that says we can't have our property or we can't do what we want. Every time somebody wants to paint their house in the scenic area, we get a lawsuit from somebody. Why not counter that with everybody in the gorge saying, hey, I don't, you know, I'm just, again, it goes back to knowing your neighbor and going back to those small groups that working together in our county. The sheriff's supposed to be in charge here, not the federal government.
Oh, I
So-
don't think so.
let's
Oh, yeah.
let's talk about the United States Supreme Court opinion, Prince v. U.S., New York v. U.S. Very clearly stated that the sheriff is the chief law enforcement officer in the county. That means they're hired. This is the United States Supreme Court cases, 2 of them. Within the last 20 years, the sheriff is higher than any government official.
Amen.
Any, including federal.
Any, that's why Obama.
That is very clear in not only American jurisprudence, but it goes all the way back through Anglo-Saxon common law with the Shire Reef, who was the chief law enforcement officer over about 2,000 people. So it's kind of a history of that. Let's getting back to the property rights issue. One person yells about something, nothing happens. 5 people yell about something, and the government will say you're the only one yelling about something that's happening. 100 people yell about it, and you can't ignore it. You have got to get together to fight this. The Sacketts up in North Idaho, if you're not familiar with that case, EPA comes in, this couple bought this land, they want to build their dream home. EPA essentially says, no, you can't. No real reason, no real factual basis, just no, you can't. Well, are you going to compensate us for that? Well, no. So they go all the way to the United States Supreme Court. It was just them, though. And it took years for that to happen. Imagine if 1,000 people in that community, which later did happen with them, but imagine if that happened on the front end. The first time that happens to your neighbor, not you, your neighbor. We stood up for them with 1,000 people. We show up down at City Hall. We show up down with our county commissioners, county councils. We show up in the state legislature. If we have 1,000 people show up at Olympia, it's a news story. It is. Imagine an entire town doing it. That is how I think you change it, and I think you hit right on.
Now, what we share with you, or with the folks in New Mexico, example with the contract.
Yeah, so the EPA comes into New Mexico, and this is New Mexico County, they're drilling for oil. EPA does one of these things where they said, no, you can't do that. Well, why? We have all the environmental protections in place, we're trying to be responsible, why can't we do that? We can't do that. The sheriff steps in, tells those EPA agents, you come back into this county, I'm throwing you into this gal. And you know what's happening today? They're drilling oil in that New Mexico county.
Right on.
Before we get to the next question, folks, you have a good sheriff here. You absolutely do. I don't know if you know it or not, and I apologize, but I'm going to tell him anyway. You know Sheriff Brown, Sheriff Mack?
Yeah.
Sheriff Mack. So, your Sheriff Brown has been to his training. So if you're not aware of that, I think that speaks volumes to the quality that you have in your sheriff. So support him when the time comes.
say thank you for your public service. Appreciate it. I'm sorry.
It's Matt Shea.
Matt, your statement that everybody should get out of debt, I think it's a very honorable statement. However, you may or may not be aware that if everyone in America paid off all their debts, there would not be any money left. Because all the money that's printed by the Federal Reserve, and these aren't dollars we're talking about, these are Federal Reserve notes, are all printed in debt. And so if we all paid off our debts, there would not be any money spent. So that's an impossibility to ever achieve.
That actually is untrue. I will challenge you on that.
Okay, well,
Ron Paul passed a bill back in the 1980s to allow silver and gold that was legal tender in the early 1900s to be legal tender again, recognized at face value. So yes, there is a money supply in this country. Yes, it is based on gold and silver. And yes, it is, at least at the federal level, recognized as such. So I also subscribe to something called the real bill theory from Adam Smith. We have the technology today to literally use all of our goods in this country. So we're not just talking about gold, silver, talking about wood, talking about everything. Every commodity you could really, that's tangible you could think of to back a currency. And that was actually Adam Smith's original thought. They just didn't have the ability to do it back then to track all that because of the paper, they had to use paperwork. We have computers, you could actually do that now. So to say there's not a money supply, it's how you define money. It's how you define money.
I got nothing to add.
we can't pay our taxes in gold and silver.
But we introduced that bill to allow that to happen inside Washington State, to bring Washington State into compliance with Article 1, Section 10 of the U.S. Constitution, which specifically says that gold and silver should be allowed in payment of tender debts.
That's what the bill said.
That's what the bill
Because the
allows.
Constitution says all fees and taxes shall be paid in gold and silver.
Yeah, Article 1, Section 10, yeah, but Washington is not doing that, not allowing it. And one of the county treasurers actually came forward and said, we need to allow this. And the reason that he said that is because a lot of elderly people have bought gold and silver as a hedge against inflation, and so they want to be able to pay their property taxes using gold and silver at the fair market value at the time of payment. So that bill has been introduced, and we are working on some revisions to it, but it has been introduced. So we can get you that. The original, so what we've introduced right now is a resolution on that. And the next step, we're working with the Sound Money Committee of Washington, and we're finalizing to introduce for this next session the actual physical bill that would implement what we want to do with the resolution. So, yeah.
Gentlemen, thank you for the time. I deeply appreciate it. I'm Commissioner of Chris Vaughn, District 1. Two items I'd like to ask for your help back in Olympia. One is the Discover Pass. You may have heard about it, but our district judge just reported to us today that he handles over 100 violation notices every week. We have a very zealous officer that is writing violation notices. He has to process them with a very small staff. None of the money comes back to our county, not a nickel. For the support of the judge to process all these violation notices. And I'd like to know, as far as I understand it from what I'm hearing is, we probably have the highest volume of Discover Pass violations in the state. I don't know of any other county that's processing more than we are. Secondly is, whatever you can do, and I will support you 101% with all the time I have to get the Forest Service to listen to the county, to work with us, just to listen with us it would be a dramatic advancement, because as far as I'm concerned, they are completely indifferent to our schools, our communities, and our county needs to provide the basic government services, public services that all the residents here expect, especially the public service from the sheriff's office. we need them to listen to us and work with us. They don't care. It's their way or the highway. Thanks.
So let's start with the Discover Pass. I was opposed, and I remain opposed to it, because I don't think I should, with the exception of parks, and I'll clarify with that, you shouldn't have to buy a pass to recreate on land you own.
Right on.
You all own that land.
Yes, we do.
They happen to manage that land, but you own it, and there's a disconnect in Olympia land. And I do say, with the exception of parks, there are improvements there. If you're gonna use a park, and the thought is to have a fee associated with it, fine. There are improvements and services that go along with it. Garbage collection, pumping, septics, etc. It used to be, when the Discover Pass was originally passed, a portion of that fine stayed at the local level with district court. And it was this year that they took it out. And they did so because they still think that there's not enough money going to parks, but I would argue, as Matt did earlier with his example, here's the sheet. If you want to pay more taxes, here you go. Forest Service. There's a little piece of law in the Federal Land Policy and Management Act. The acronym is FLIP, that requires federal agencies that manage resource lands, BLM, Forest Service, are the two great examples, to coordinate their resource management activities with the local elected county commissioners if, number one, it's requested, and number two, you have a policy plan that lays out the policies. What that does is puts the county commissioners at a level playing field with the decision makers in the federal agency. The federal agency is required to seek consistency with the locally adopted plans. If they cannot achieve consistency, they must document why they cannot. They fail to do it, the courts throw it out. Hawaii County, Idaho, Modoc County, California, Boundary County, Idaho have had tremendous success with coordination. There is a tool available to you as a county commissioner, and I would think, a room full of people that would voluntarily serve on a commission to put together the policies that rein in what the feds are doing with the land they manage, because we own it.
Yeah, but that's not, I'm going to disagree with you, but that's not 100% true. Just south in Oregon, in Klamath County, they had a plan, they had the Forest Service kind of worked with them. It took them almost 10 years because the Forest Service, the federal government, drugged their feet, and they finally went to court, and they finally the judge says, you've got this plan, you've got to implement it. And it took them almost 10 years for the people to get that plan implemented. And the other thing is, and I read the stories up here, you can deal with Forest Service, you ask them to do something, and I'm tired of getting this answer, we haven't got the money, we don't have the time, we don't have any money to do this stuff. But yet they can turn around and some certain parties can go out and 2 weeks from now, they can, also the Forest Service takes over another 10,000 acres of our forest, like taking it off the tag, because there's a spotted owl over there, or they're doing something, you know, we've got not a plan, we've got stuff here that needs to be, we can make some money, the county can get money back on it, and I agree with you, get the Forest Service, give us our land, or our 90% of our land back so we can put it on the tax roll, we can log it sensibly and do that, but they say, well, we can't get to this spending, got to that spending, we haven't got the money, you know, but yet they can grab the land and they don't cut, well, you're gonna go broke, that's not our problem, you know,
Well, and that's why we're working with the legislative fix of getting those federal lands back on
great.
tax rolls. But I can tell you, the Oregon example, they weren't coordinated, they were cooperating. And it's illegal, it doesn't seem like a big difference there. So there's a huge legal difference there. You must demand coordination, consistency with the policies. And your policies could be as simple as no net loss of taxable acreage in Skamania County. And if the feds want to come in and buy more land, they got to reach consistency with that, which means they got to sell something.
So let's talk ATVs real quick. And the reason I bring up ATVs is we've had to deal with the Forest Service, the use of ATVs on national forest land. This year, as part of our freedom agenda, one of those 5 bills we got signed into law without veto, opened up hundreds of miles of park land to ATV use in Washington State. How were we able to do that? Well, the Forest Service, their own policy was that the county road laws and the county ordinances ruled on their land where the county roads came up to Forest Service land. So when we passed that law and it opened it up for the counties, it opened it up for the Forest Service as well. So that opened literally hundreds of miles of land. Forest Service came back and said, no, it only opened up half the roads. Here's why. Because ATVs are legal on all highways in the state. And we were in front of a bunch of county commissioners and everything else, and we said, okay, where is that in statute? Well, it's not statute. Okay, but where is that in a rule? It's not a rule. Where is it then? It's in our own internal policy. Okay, so we have county commissioners now in the northern counties demanding coordination. First of all, they passed a resolution recognizing that half the roads were open, and thank you. Now they're going to demand coordination on that issue with the Forest Service because the policy's clear. If they do that, the county will win. But you got to do coordination. It's not the same as kind of working together. It is a legal, it has legal effect in a court. It's a hammer, and a lot of county commissioners don't know about it.
Name's Dave Prosser, and I just want to comment on Commissioner Brong's statement about the Discovery Pass. We hunters that buy a hunting license from the Washington State Fish and Wildlife. We get our hunting license, which allows us to hunt on federal land. But for us to hunt on state land, we also have to buy a Discovery Pass. So this is by the state of Washington, Fish and Wildlife, that we get our hunting permit. Also, the loggers that are up there in the woods logging state land, they get the contract to harvest the timber on state land. They also have to buy a Discovery Pass to go to work, which is pure stupidity, absolute stupidity, and something, as Mr. Brown says, needs to be done about it because it's for us, it's our backyard. It's totally our backyard, and we're like landlocked on Highway 14 and the what roads the county owns. Pretty soon they're going to make us buy Discovery Pass to drive on the state highway of Highway 14. I mean, it's kind of obvious, but it's just a sad situation.
They will offer a gas tax increase to the Discovery Pass.
You know, and to go along with that too, a couple of weeks ago, there was a nice article in the Columbian, and the article had to do with the Discover Pass, the state pass, the county passes, and the gist of the article was the reason the citation time was so high is because you had, depending on where you go, you had to have a different pass to get to these places, you know, and people are generally confused. You go over here to Beacon Rock, you gotta have a certain pass to stay in Beacon Rock. You go to a state forest, you gotta have another pass to get in there. And they're all, you know, jumbled up and people go, which one do I need? I usually got the wrong one or something and they get cited for it.
And that right there is killing our tourism. Because people come over here and they get a ticket, they're not coming back.
Exactly.
And so they don't spend their money in our county anymore because they just have to go, they gotta come back and pay their $100 fine or whatever it is.
Don't forget the boat pass at Goose Lake. Yeah, you gotta have that too.
And the Discover Pass was billed as being universal too. And that was one of the things that we fought there in the legislature. We said it's not universal. It's just going to add confusion to it. And they aren't stupid. They are intentionally doing this so they get revenue. And they know, they know that's what they're doing.
You know, I'd like to second Commissioner Braun. I'm a commissioner too. And the Discovery Pass is a huge issue with us. 1,800 tickets, 2012, with absolutely no revenues to help our processing. I mean, it's to the point of being ridiculous.
It is.
One of the things I wanted to touch on is part of a seminar here is less government and lower taxes. I think we all have to do more with less. And I believe this is about all the electeds, not just the sheriff, all the electeds encouraging that. And I think that's what what it is, a lot of what you guys have spoke on and the crowd has spoke on, it's about doing more with less and figuring out how we can get it.
Amen. And the unfunded mandates are down to the local level particularly, but I want to talk about the gas tax very quickly. Let's just talk about the gas tax. They want to do, their first iteration was a 13-cent increase with 3 cents at the sole discretion of the Secretary of Transportation. So you have taxation without representation, literally. Then they said, well, we want to do a 10-cent gas tax increase, to which we responded, you know, it might be fine to talk about that, but Washington State right now spends 30% of a road project before we ever break ground. Before we ever break ground. We built a ferry that can't float, a bridge that's sinking, a ramp in the wrong place. Why don't we get that right first before we talk about a tax increase? Because you know what's going to happen? If we keep the tax level where it is, if we lower taxes, we wouldn't have border cities like Spokane Valley, like Vancouver, driving across the border to gas up. That revenue would stay in Washington State. The tourism would stay in Washington State. It would stay here. And I don't think they understand that there's a principle of taxation. Taxation doesn't redistribute wealth. It redistributes people.
That's right.
They just believe.
This young lady's had her hand up for quite a while.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to hear you talking about liberty and property rights, because here in Washington, we have I-522 coming up for a vote this November, and that is the labeling of genetically modified organisms, which I propose for, and I think we do need to label our food because there's so much crap in all our food, and it's making people sick. As a farmer and as a gardener, I own a farm not in this area, in another state. I'm concerned that my property rights are could be violated and will be probably at some future point, because I can't plant my seeds or save my seeds for the future, and because of Monsanto and their stuff. I think that's a private property right that I should have, that anything grows on my land, stays on my land, I can use it and store it and save it and do whatever I want with it. And this labeling thing is just part and parcel of that. I want to know what's in my food. I want to know what I'm feeding my nephews and nieces and my parent. So I would like to know what you all think about private property rights and I-522.
For private property rights, there's a reason that property is listed, life, liberty, and property. It doesn't say, it's not a suggestion, it's not if we tell you it's okay. Property is fundamental, and we must protect our rights as property owners. As far as 522 and the labeling, I have mixed emotions on it, and I'll tell you why. As a cattleman, I was a proponent of country of origin label, which is the same concept. I didn't like the direction it went because I believe it's a marketing tool. It's a tool that I should be able to use as a producer. It should be a tool that's available to me. My concern with 522 is where the liability is going to be. Is it going to be set at the right place? And I honestly haven't worked that out yet in my own mind. I need to go back and read it one more time. I believe in labeling, but my reaction to it is this the right approach, mandating it, or should we, as legislators, be influencing that through other, be it a tax incentive or other incentive-based mechanism to get the producers to label? I'm not sure. There's a lot to it for me personally, and I haven't made up my mind on 522 specifically. I'm with you 100%. I want to see labels. How we get there is where I'm
It's a
concerned.
start, and the thing is, the free market should decide. Label it and let the free market decide. That's how we do everything else in this country, so why not with GMOs?
And I come from 4 generations of my family have been in eastern Washington. I come from a family of loggers and ranchers. We had a homestead on the Scottish side of my family down in Dayton, Washington. So it's a very key issue for me. we've pursued as part of our freedom agenda, because we believe in property rights and because we believe in building coalitions around issues, not focusing on what we disagree on, but what we agree on, food freedom has been a huge issue with us in the freedom agenda. There is a law in Washington State, for example, that says if you're a grandmother and you want to bake cookies in your house and you want to sell them, or you want to bring them to a farmer's market, it used to be you couldn't do that at all. Then it was regulated to the point where, yes, you can do that, but you have to allow the health inspectors to literally be able to inspect every area of your home. Grandma's underwear drawer, literally. It was terrible. So as part of the freedom agenda, we went forward and we said, no, we're not going to do that. You're not going to treat people that way. You can only regulate the licensed area of the home if you're going to even regulate that. But grandma should be able to sell whatever she darn well wants to sell out of her kitchen. The free market's going to determine that. And that is part of our freedom agenda, so specifically addressing the property rights. On 522, I agree with Dave. I am in favor of labeling. I understand the dangers of Monsanto, the seed monopoly that's out there. I understand all of that. 522, from an attorney's perspective, is not very well written. It just isn't. And there are some serious problems I see with it from a legal perspective. They might end up in a lot of lawsuits in the courts. So that's my objection to it, not the issue of labeling, because I've watched some of the documentaries. I'm very cognizant of it. I am very cognizant of what I put in my body, and particularly GMOs is a big concern to me. So.
Michael Bell, Skamania County. When you mentioned that we should get out of debt, and we should get out of debt personally and then ultimately as a nation, there's a transition period when you change your lifestyle from debt-based and always borrowing against the future for what you get in material goods immediately to having cash basis or not having that debt, but building up the wealth that you have instantly. How would you guide, how would you ideally guide if you had the ability to set the agenda in Olympia? How would you guide the citizens through that transition from debt-based to having a cash basis?
Well, first we got to define wealth and money correctly. So going back to what we were talking about, every dollar comes out of the ground, of the air, and the water. It does. We have to get that in our minds and understand that. So going forward, it's an educational issue first and foremost. What is wealth? What is money? We have to get folks to understand exactly what that means. I think before we do anything else, that's number one. And Michael, I want to thank you for all your efforts in promoting freedom and liberty in this area and everything you've done, particularly on the internet, and your stands for freedom and liberty. And it's great to see you here tonight. Thank you.
Okay, so to answer specifically, I believe we need to go back to what the priorities of government are. That we need to look at, based on the Constitution, what should the government be providing? This year's budget that was passed, and it was a bipartisan budget, grew by $2 billion in expected revenue. $2 billion. And on top of that, they included another $913 million over the next 10 years in tax increases. Okay? It's not sustainable. That is not, until we do that, until we take a step back and go, what are the priorities of government? Protecting public health, protecting public safety. In this state, like it or not, the Constitution is clear: education and infrastructure. That's where I come from. And those are the way when I look at it, that's based on the state constitution. After that, get government out of it, and then we can start looking at having the reserve necessary so that eventually we'll hit the point where we're working forward instead of backwards.
One quick question. This is back to our area here. Do you know of any representative people on the other side of the river that think like you guys do on this liberty of personal property and stuff like that? I mean, legislatures and stuff, state legislatures, that think like that. The reason I'm asking is, we need to get some people on the other side, like you guys here in our area, to take back, get the government and all these private out of the court and let us live in the court. I am so tired of these people that live in Portland, in Vancouver, coming in and sitting in the court commission and telling us what we can do, what we can't do. We can't bring in any kind of business to promote jobs and stuff, oh, because you're gonna take out this tree, you're gonna do that. Get out of our lives and let us run our lives here in the court.
Admittedly, we've done a poor job reaching out to Oregon. We have Liz Pike down here, who's been tremendous on liberty and freedom issues. We have done a poor job reaching out to Oregon. We have a network of legislators that include Idaho and Montana, where we regularly communicate with them on issues of liberty and freedom. Also Oklahoma, Texas, Utah. So we have a network. We have not reached out to Oregon. So thank you for calling us on that, and we will do so.
To answer directly, there is a solution when it comes to the Gorge Commission. The way that the federal law is set up, it is equally funded, 50% Washington, 50% Oregon. And if those numbers are different, the lowest number in the budget prevails. Folks, start emailing, calling, writing letters to everybody in the state legislature, Washington State, tell them to defund it. 0 is 0. 0 is 0. They can't operate. The feds are broke, so they don't have the money to do it. 0.
But if the Gorge Commission is defunded, the legislation is still there. Isn't the Gorge Commission a cushion between the legislation and us? I don't support the Gorge Commission, or, I'm a Skamania County Commissioner and everything, but the legislation is what needs to go away.
I agree.
So, and they're actually a cushion, even though I don't agree with a lot they do. Let's be clear, they're a cushion between us and the legislation.
Us involved too, yes.
Yeah, and what he's saying, Friends of Gorge is fog. But we have to be very careful, because when I first started running and I researching and spending time with that, and I asked a lot, Brad Anderson, which a lot of people in here know, that was the advocate of our county and everything. The Gorge Commission, it is almost, maybe I'm using the wrong words, a cushion between us and the legislation. The legislation needs to go. Then the Gorge Commission will go after that.
I couldn't agree more.
Right.
And Jamie Herrera Butler do that for you?
I don't want the county to be fighting those guys, the Friends of Gorge, and paying the legal fees in Baker and Bernard County. The Gorge Commission fights them, multiple.
My understanding is that the suits are brought in the county that it occurs in, correct? And so if it occurs in this county and the prosecutor's not willing to prosecute it,
Yeah, but that's not.
there's no teeth in that bill.
Yeah, but that's not 100% true either, because a lot of the suits on the civil end of that come out of Portland, or they come out of Vancouver.
Well,
and you got these people, I'm sorry, I'm going to make some million, but you got these friends of the tree huggers and stuff, and the environmentalists that live in California that we're coming up to the Gorge for my 3-week vacation. I want to keep it pristine there. They're the ones that are making all the. And we have to live here, or we have no say. They say, well, like you said, you want to paint your house, you can't do it. You got to do this, you can't do it. We can't bring businesses in here. Well, we can't do that either.
It comes down to compliance, though. If
Get
the
out of our
prosecutor doesn't prosecute
Get
it,
out of our lives.
there's no teeth in the bill.
Get out of our lives.
I think that's an attorney question.
Well, again, this comes back to what you do here. It comes back to what you do here.
That's right.
We've created literally a Facebook page for almost every issue that's out there. So you may not agree with me on taxes, but you agree with me on property rights. Stop Agenda 21 Washington. You guys could form your own here. So when information comes out, you can get it out there and get to the hearings when they have the hearings. And then, when Olympia's in session, which is a horrible thought for most people, but when Olympia's in session, you can actually start lobbying the legislature on repealing the legislation, the long-term fix.
What gives the agency of the state of Washington jurisdiction over me personally as to what I can or cannot grow on my property?
I don't think they don't have it.
I want to grow industrial hemp on my property.
Oh, perfect. So, part of the Freedom Agenda. We introduced House Bill 1888. You can take a look at it. Washington State used to be the largest exporter of hemp, I think, in the United States, if not in the world. Why aren't we doing it? Why aren't we coming back and doing it? So we have legislation actually to do that here in Washington.
Why do I need legislation? It should be part of my liberties. I am born with this right of liberty to grow hemp on my property.
I could not agree with you more. Right now, we are in a position where we have all these rules, all these statutes that have been put in place, and we're repealing it. We're trying to get rid of them and roll them back. That's a large portion of what that hemp bill does. So don't think of it as putting legislation into effect as much as repealing what's already there and legalizing what should already be legal, legalizing freedom.
I can grow it now.
You could grow it now.
My sheriff can stand between me and any agency of the state or the feds.
Absolutely, he could.
And that's law.
Well, that's,
That's the
well,
Constitution.
it's not law, it's liberty. Yeah.
And that's the Constitution. And we're born with that right, we're not.
We are. But
That's on record.
we're dealing, I'm sure you do, but we're dealing right now, as I like to say, in a false paradigm. We are working in a false paradigm. So to work in a false paradigm, we introduce a bill for hemp freedom. We get, not only do we get educated on all the uses for hemp, including sisal twine for our hops fields and our vineyards, hempcrete, lightweight insulation you can put in your walls, and dog toys. And we have all these businesses that we're importing hemp from Canada and China that we can actually be exporting. I couldn't agree with you more. We're working within a false paradigm. That's why we introduced a bill to get that all rolled back so we can do it. And by the way, they made it out of committee and we've been promised that that will be passed this year. So, this coming year.
Is it not true that any law that's repugnant to the Constitution is null and void?
We've worked with that for a long time. I was part of the original 10th Amendment movement doing nullification. I totally agree with you. But you have to have a sheriff that's going to stand with you. And not only the sheriff standing with you, when he walks out of the foxhole, you better not be alone. You better have some folks stand shoulder to shoulder with him. Last question, I think.
Last one.
Oh, we'll get the last question. Thank you guys for being here tonight. Everybody kind of hit around us here in the board when our Freedom Act and stuff follows along the same lines. All the environmental groups here that operate within the gorge area, the Friends of the White Salmon, Friends of the Gorge, Friends of the Short-tailed Rat, somewhere else, they have so much money coming from all over the world, you know, that here in Skamania County, we can't afford that, even as an individual. You know, I show up at rallies and whatever it takes, you know, to oppose those people. But what do you do about the fact that they got billions of dollars to work with? And like somebody here said, they show up for 3 weeks vacation to windsurf and keep this gorge pristine, but they have backing them billions and billions of dollars. And there should be something out there that says they can't come in here and do that unless they use their own money in their own pocket. And talking about meetings, attending meetings, grassroots process like that, some of the meetings that were held on things that are important to us here in the board are held in Olympia or Vancouver or Eugene or someplace like that where the working man just can't get off, go down that day to attend that rally or that meeting, you know. So if it concerns the gorge and what happens within the gorge, the meetings should be held in the gorge. And we should be able to come up with a rule or regulation somewhere to bring those meetings here so we can talk about our freedoms and the discovery pass. Only if you're 62, you can get a golden pass now for only $10. It's a lifetime driving the forest. I was told when I got stopped in the national forest out by Moose Lake one day, I didn't need the discovery pass to go through there. As long as I didn't stop, get out of my car, and take a picture. So I held it all the way to Trout Lake.
So the issue is standing. It's for appeals or for lawsuits.
Yeah. They throw everything at the wall, and what sticks they go after, what doesn't, they don't worry about.
So keep in mind, and my response is what I'm going to tell you is that it takes time. We didn't get to where we're at today overnight, and to fix it, it's a slow road. One of the things that we've introduced in the past, and we're going to continue to push, is that there's actual standing and harm. So that if somebody wants to appeal a county commissioner decision, for example, that they must have standing, meaning they were involved in the process. Number two, that they have actual harm. They must be a property owner, for example, if it's a law that related to land use, they must be a property owner who's going to have some sort of impact from that law.
That's what's happening with the conservancy here in the gorge, is we want to be through the private property, so we can have the stands.
Exactly right. We've got to reverse that. I mean, that's why, quite frankly, it's one of the reasons that I am so strong in my desire to return as much of the state and federal land as we can back onto the private property tax rolls. Get them back into production, get them out of the agency's hands. And so, quite frankly, folks, you as a property owner, you're going to manage the land better. You're going to manage, if you're a forester, you're going to manage your property for long-term production. It only makes sense to me.
Okay, can I touch on this? And I don't know, again, it's an attorney question, but it would seem to me that everybody in those little groups, Friends of the Gorge and all this, they have individuals that are on that committee. Well, my understanding is you can sue anybody for anything in small claims court, and if you pile them with everybody that agrees with you in small claims court, they're gonna have to come back from California to fight that court, or they're gonna automatically lose. And you get enough of these individuals that it's painful to sit on that committee, they'll go away. Because they can't use somebody else's money, and they can't call a lawyer for small claims court.
And that's how they do what they do, because that's what they come up here to do. You have something happen here. First thing, they run to court and file a lawsuit. And they've got the money, like you said, they've got the money.
They use lawyers to fight it,
No,
though.
what's that? They've got
They
the
do.
money.
They do.
File
They have
these
somebody
lawsuits.
else.
File these
Attack them
lawsuits.
personally.
So there are two things. I want to end on this. Turn it back over to the sheriff. Two things. We put out a plan a few years ago called the Step-by-Step Plan for Freedom. It went national. It was part of kind of the early freedom agenda that we had here in Washington. Step-by-Step Plan for Freedom, part 1 and 2. There are two things in that that are key. Two teeth you have. Enforcement and money. At the state level, what we wanted to introduce was a federal tax escrow account, where all the money that we collect for the federal government, for example, the gas tax, we cut them a check every 3 months. We want to put it in the federal escrow account, and if we start nullifying things, we start not complying with things, we start demanding coordination, they start trying to pull money, we have a hammer sitting there, you don't get yours either. That's one of the ways to enforce. The second is the county sheriff. The county sheriff standing in between is so powerful. And all of your elected local officials are so powerful they don't even know it. Probably county commissioners didn't even know they had the tool of coordination until we mentioned it tonight. They have the hammer on enforcement. You got to bring it back to the local level, and the reason to do that is because the genius of the founding fathers was if you did that, government closest to the people was most accountable, and that would maintain freedom because it was decentralized. If we do that, our kids and our grandkids will live in peace and prosperity and freedom. I want to thank you all for having us here.
You have all been very patient. I wish you'd stay just 5 more minutes. I do have some closing remarks. Before I do that, Tom Lannon had a very quick announcement.
Oh. Hi, I'm Tom Lannon. I live in Stevenson. I've been watching the Giver Paint Shop Task Force, the Friends of the Gorge, numerous other groups that want to weigh in on this, if you will. And I've had this idea about forming a group called COGS, Citizens of the Gorge, to serve as a counterbalance to those people. I saw an article the other day that said Friends of the Gorge had $10 million in the bank. They were opening a new office in Washougal. Anyway, this takes effort, takes coordination. I don't know if I'd like to just be the spark that maybe starts something. This Saturday, noon, in this parking lot. If you've got any interest in that, ideas about it, I'm going to be back there.
Okay, bring it on back. There are 3 things I want, hang on, there are 3 things I want to mention. First of all, Susan Krug, thank you. There are some refreshments in the back. Actually, I think just Evans, and I know that she brought some. Dawn may have brought some too, I think. I saw you putting stuff out, so.
Liz has
and Liz Green, she's always good about bringing drinks. Please partake of those so that they don't have to take them home. Secondly, the Republican Party was kind enough to offer the Declaration Constitution, small books over on the table. You are free to take one or two of those if you'd like. They are free. However, there is a donation jar. If you'd like to leave some money there, please do so. Thirdly, I think these two gentlemen may be leaving here to go to Carson, to the Backwoods Brewery, for, I think what Dan coined is Liberty on the Rocks. I'm sure you're all welcome to join and maybe carry on this conversation. I'd like just a couple minutes, real quick. Actually, Rick, you have a comment or a question?
Just a fast comment, and this is from the first time we met and got together. You guys bring some great stuff here, great information, but what's most important is when you leave here, you gotta go tell somebody, and we're gonna come back together. I'm from the major metropolis of Mill Lake, and up in that area, we're concerned about all those things, but we've gotta educate, we've gotta teach. There's too many people out there that they don't know. And the fear of the unknown is great. So when you leave here, tell somebody, and we're planning up there to get together some more and to educate our community. Educate your communities. Get after it.
Thank you very much.
I was just going to ask, can I plug what I'm doing? You know what I'm doing.
Yeah, very quickly.
My name is Carl Hoppel, and I thought the first 5 minutes of Matt's talk was a plug for a company that I'm a part of, Gorge Prep or Gorge Preparedness. We run a teaching and training organization for storing food, working as teams, learning new skills that were all in the old country. Learning how to shoot, learning how to store food, learning how to prepare for disaster preparedness and emergency preparedness. So gorgeprep.com, we offer classes anywhere from free to, I think, $20 is our most expensive class. Check it out, because that's exactly what you're talking about, is getting together as a community and preparing for ice storms and all the other stuff we have out there. So,
Thank you, Carl.
thank you, Jay.
I thought these two gentlemen talked about the legislative agenda that are coming up for 2014, and I guess I wanted to take just a couple minutes to let you know what I'm focused on right now. We had a very successful effort the last 2 years. The United States Forest Service made a move in 2011 to expand their enforcement authority off the national forest. Western state sheriffs moved rapidly on that issue. It took us 2 years, but we finally reached an agreement with them, or an understanding on their part, that puts the sheriff back at the top of the law enforcement tree in every county across the West. And actually, we've developed a memorandum that spreads across the United States and is available to any sheriff. And I think it's obviously a very positive thing, but I think we've sent a message to the Forest Service: back off. The sheriff is the chief law enforcement officer of the county, and we intend to stay that way. However, that doesn't mean it doesn't come with challenges. There are a lot of things they're still attempting to do. I was out hunting the last couple of weeks with archery. It's kind of a new challenge for me. I came back to find out that last week, Forest Service got together and conducted a checkpoint on the 23 road north of Trout Lake for mushroom permits or mushroom pickers, which means that they funneled every vehicle going in or coming down that road into that checkpoint, illegally seized a person, detained them, checked their vehicle for mushrooms and permits. I see a Fourth Amendment issue there, and that's the next thing we're going after. The last thing I would share with you is, David started out saying this: the change comes from the grassroots. It comes from the people in this room. It comes from the people in this county and every county that's represented across the state. There is a workshop tomorrow, and I talked to these two gentlemen about it earlier. There's a legislative workshop at the Criminal Justice Training Commission to once again consider general authority enforcement powers for state parks, Department of Natural Resources, liquor control. Sheriffs are opposed to general authority for those agencies. It's a long story. They're limited authority agencies now. They only have enforcement authority in those areas that they were hired to work: state trust lands, state parks, and liquor control issues. They want the ability to enforce state law everywhere in the state. We oppose that. Sheriffs will be represented tomorrow by WASPIC, which is the Sheriffs and Police Chiefs Association. But the power in defeating this movement by these agencies will come from you. And I will tell you that you will hear from me on this. And when the legislative session opens in January, I will be coming to all of you asking for letters, emails, phone calls. As they said, you get one, you get two, not a big deal. We get 100 or we get a town, it's going to make a difference. And I think every sheriff in the state is committed to the same effort. And I have a feeling that we're going to have success in hopefully finally defeating this issue. It's been on the agenda for the last 3 years that I've been up there to testify against it, and they will continue to push for it unless we send a strong message. And I need that from you. That being said, we will probably gather again after the first of the year. Not this year. We'll get through the rest of this and the holidays, but I look forward to hopefully seeing you back here, and we'll see what the agenda holds for the next meeting. I really appreciate the fact that you're all here tonight. I ask you to continue to read and learn. My wife, Debbie's in the back. She just bought me 2 books, Liberty and Tyranny by Mark Levin, and the Liberty Amendment, and I'm just digging into those.
What's the second one, Dave?
The Liberty Amendment. I just finished a book called The 5,000-Year Lead. Wonderful book. Wonderful book. Whatever it is that grabs you, that gets you into the mode of thinking about liberty and freedom, take that opportunity. Spend some time. Learn. Share it. Rick made a great point. Share it with your family. So, again, thank you all for being here. I think I'm going to join them backwards. All right. Good night.
Norm, how you doing? Good to see you, as always.